Hello and welcome to the November 2024 edition of AviaDev Insight Africa's Connectivity Update, the podcast offering a deep dive into the route developments and general news in Africa. My name is Jon Howell. I'm the CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We're a platform dedicated to supporting the development of air connectivity to, from and within the African continent. Now, we've got a bumper lineup of topics today, but unlike previous editions, they're not all just focused on new routes, but some of the news stories that are obviously impacting the future connectivity of Africa. As always, each month I enlist the support of two industry experts to make sense of these announcements and what's going on in the news. We have Chief Regional Troublemaker Sean Mendis. He is here to educate and entertain us, as always, with his trademark brand of aviation wit and wisdom. Sean brings 20 years of experience in the industry, including stints managing airports, commercial airlines and cargo airlines in Africa and the Middle East. And our second guest as well, who's a very regular contributor, is Behramjee Ghadially, who is an aviation consultant with over 20 years of experience as well, but supporting airlines globally with their network planning and strategy, and is coming up to almost 10 years working in the African continent. However, as a special treat and as promised on the previous edition, we also have a guest joining us for this episode. Those of you on YouTube may have seen him already, but we're joined and absolutely honoured and delighted to be joined by Joao Po Jorge, who is most recently served as the CEO of LAM Mozambique Airlines. He also received the AviaDev Lifetime Achievement Award in Namibia earlier this year, so will be a familiar voice and face to both our listeners and everybody who's been interested in African aviation. And I think it's been almost 4 decades, Joao, working in African aviation. Is that fair?
True, correct. Oh, that sounds too much.
But he's still young at heart, as anybody who's been for a drink with Joao or some prawns will attest to, which is great. So welcome to the podcast. And yeah, he's looking very young with a haircut. I'm very jealous. So yeah, welcome to the podcast, Joao.
Thank you.
Okay, so just before we get started, obviously the usual disclaimer, of course, the opinions of my guests today are of course their own, but as you will hear, they are very much backed up with compelling reasoning. So it's now time to fasten your seatbelts as we push back and start our taxi out for the November 2024 AviaDev Connectivity Update. Okay, so let's get started, and let's start not necessarily with a new route, but a story that looms large over South African aviation and Southern African aviation. Actually, now they have regional operations, and that's the investigation into the ownership structure of FlySafair and whether it meets the requirements and obviously can still have a license to operate in the market. Sean, why don't you kick us off with a bit of an overview, with the caveat of we're here on the 22nd of November, so things could happen between now and people listening, but what do we know so far?
What we know so far, and we'll go back a bit to when FlySafair was initially launching operations in 2014. FlySafair's parent company, so to speak, is ALS Holdings, which is an Irish registered company. When they applied for their initial license in 2014, there were some issues with foreign ownership. To comply with South African law, they were initially denied a license and told that they needed to change their shareholding, which they did. They created a trust in South Africa. They sold some shares to employees and restructured things that they met the requirements of the license at the time. However, between 2014 and today, they have once again changed their shareholding structure and have also changed the way that the trust, which holds some of the shareholding of theirs, is structured. Consequently, there were some complaints made to both the International Air Services Council and the Domestic Air Services Council in South Africa to examine whether they continue to qualify for an operating license. Now, the interesting thing is that in South Africa, there are 2 different sets of regulations, one governing airlines who are entitled to operate domestically and a different one governing airlines which are entitled to operate internationally. So there are 2 separate councils which act independently on separate rules to determine. So it's quite possible that Safair may be compliant with one set of rules but not compliant with another. Regarding the domestic license, the law requires that, among different specifications, that at least 75% of the voting rights must be held by residents of the Republic of South Africa. Now, that doesn't specify citizenship, it doesn't specify beneficial ownership or many of these other questions which come into play when there's a trust involved. It just simply says 75% of voting rights held by residents of the Republic. Okay, that's not really what is being litigated right now because the Domestic Council has not yet taken up the complaint against SAFAir. What has been ruled upon is the International Air Services Council. Now, the International Services Council has a different wording in their regulation, and that states that the voting rights must be substantially held by residents of the Republic. But there is no definition as to what substantially held actually constitutes. Is that 10%, 20%, 40%, 50%, 75, 90? That seems to be something that the International Air Services Council will make a determination on. And the International Council has made a determination that SAFAir's structure, as it currently stands, is in violation of this substantial holding clause. And consequently, while they have made the finding that FlySafair is violating it, they have not found a sanction yet. So they've been found guilty but not yet sentenced. They will be sentenced on the 28th of November, so that's coming up within the next few days, where there are various options available. Their license could be revoked completely. That means no more international flights. Remember, this only governs their international operations for now. Their license could be suspended, where they say, right, for 3 months, no international flights until you do something. Or they could just be given a period of time. You have 6 weeks to rectify this the following way, reduce shareholding here or there, and confirm to us it's done, and then your license is not suspended. So we don't quite know what the council is going to sentence SAFAir to. SAFAir doesn't seem to know either, but they're putting out a lot of statements with a lot of bravado in them that this is not going to be a problem. We're on top of it, where this is a good thing to have clarity. And to some extent, that's true. It is better that this is ruled upon by the International Council, where the worst that could happen to them is 3 routes effectively get cut. Routes to Zimbabwe, Zim, and Namibia are the only places they're flying internationally to right now. Actually, no, they've also got some charter operator, I think Mauritius and a couple others. But it's a negligible amount of capacity relative to their domestic. So having this ruled upon by the International Council to begin with is probably a positive for SAFAir, because that'll ensure that whatever ruling is found, they'll be able to put in place to comply with the Domestic Council by the time they take it up. And obviously from a South African market perspective, it's very critical that SAFAir continues to operate, at least in the short term, in the domestic market, because they have over 60% of the market share, at least by capacity. In the international market, they're big players. In the domestic market, they're the behemoth. And it's never a dull moment in South African market, and I think this is the latest episode of the soap opera out there.
Yeah, I said this when I interviewed Elmar in October. I said, Elmar, the CEO of SAFAir, I said, South Africa is a domestic market, and as a market, I don't know of one in the world that's had quite so much turbulence in the last 10 years or so, with all the new entrants and exits and bankruptcies and political things and different bits. So it's really interesting to watch. So thanks for the overview. Anything that either Behramjee or Joao want to add on this story, or are you happy with Sean's kind of explanation?
Yes, if you may, can I add something? Thanks, Sean, for that very good explanation. I think for the public in general is interesting to know. But I'm going to take the advocacy of the consumer and of the operator. Okay, I won't talk about the legal system and the law in South Africa. The first question I ask, if you allow a SATAM operator to do a Joburg-Vic Falls flight, what's the ownership of that operator? Okay. So I think it's very important to say SAFAir is playing a role of connecting different points in South Africa with Johannesburg or Cape Town, and then taking them on a, say, 5th degree freedom if it were a totally foreign operator. First question. Then the second one is this, and Sean said 60% of the market, 5,000 flights a month, I think 27 a day to Cape Town. Is it going to happen something drastic in November where South African domestic operators will have no option? I don't think the market will take that over in a few days. And in a peak season, I think Christmas is the top season for operations in South Africa. And the other question I'd like to talk about is I think it was mentioned, it's one of the advantages. And South African and FlySafair are quite a low cost, a low fare, I should say, offer. They offer quite low fares. They had flights with very good fares. And one of the reasons is because they have access to very cheap capital in Europe, being ownership outside. Maybe we need to look at options for other operators to have access to this if that's the problem. Like I said, the legal side, I don't want to talk about that. I'm sure some way will be found to sort it out by voting power, etc. But mainly these are the very few points I'd like to say. Okay, they might be punished. Did they do this with bad intentions? Just 2 years ago, they applied for, I think, 5 international routes, and they were given them, and the structure was the same as it is today. Why were they given in that condition? So I believe that there's a very big issue for South Africa, South African courts, councils to deal with, and the South African market to address this. I just wanted to add these few points to what Sean said from a different perspective. Thank you very much.
I think that's an amazing point to make. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think that is the huge question, not just for South Africa, but every African market, where we look and say that one of the biggest challenges is access to capital. But when somebody is able to access capital from a global market, and remember, an airline industry is a global industry. You're competing for aircraft with operators in Europe, in North America, in India, in Australia, and everywhere else. But yet, if you're trying to use these antiquated rules of substantial ownership and effective control, which SATAM itself actually gets rid of by moving towards a principal place of business model, yet you continue to have so many countries, so many organizations, while lobbying for SATAM out of one side of their mouth, continue to hang on these antiquated concepts of nationality ownership in a globalized industry. Thank you. I think that is I completely agree with you. It's something which people need to wake up and do it. And I'm glad to hear your voice advocating for that as well.
Yeah, but I suppose the other side of this is rules are rules, right? And the other operators in the market saying these have got to apply to everyone. But I think your point, Joao, about why didn't they look at this 2 years ago when they grant them the rights is completely valid. That's definitely something that needs to be addressed. Behramjee, have you got any input on this?
No, not on this, but I have a question for Sean, which I'm sure many of our audience would also like to be answered. As many of us know, British Airways used to partner with Comair in South Africa, but it was branded as a British Airways plane whenever you flew Johannesburg and to Cape Town. Mm-hmm. So could you please educate the audience by informing them how British Airways and Comair partnership came about and how British Airways was allowed to sell it? Because the perception is that British Airways owned Comair, but the reality is totally different. If you could just give a brief rundown about that, please.
Absolutely. The relationship between British Airways and Comair before Comair's sad demise was actually the same as the relationship between Airlink and SAA. They were franchise partners. Effectively, all flights that Comair flew under the British Airways brand were operated by Comair, which was at the time a South African airline. Comair has also had issues with the licensing council over its nationality and ownership in the past. That's an aside. But Comair was a South African carrier, and they paid a franchise fee to British Airways in order to use British Airways' reservation system, their branding, and all the commercial heft of the British Airways name and systems. So Comair was not British owned. In fact, British Airways had zero stake in Comair at the end. I think over time, at some point, they did have a minority stake, but nothing ever a controlling stake or a major stake, and nothing at all at the end when Comair went bankrupt. Now, of course, Comair also had a separate brand, which was Kulula.com, which was actually the same as the plane that flew for British Airways and the planes that flew for these bright green painted Kulula planes were actually they're the same airline. A lot of people didn't know that at the time, but they were all part of the same Comair AOC and the same. A pilot could fly the morning flight Johannesburg to Cape Town on British Airways, all hoity-toity, and fly back on a green monster. So yeah, that was an interesting thing. And as I said, it was a similar setup that Airlink had with South African Airways before their nasty divorce in 2019, where once again, all flights that Airlink flew up to 2019 were flown under the brand of South African Airways. And once again, although both Airlink and SAA were obviously South African-owned carrier, so there was no ownership issues. But once again, there were separate entities, but the flights were being sold under a franchise model rather than under an ownership or a subsidiary or anything else. It was purely a case of we're paying you a royalty fee to borrow your name and everything else.
Thank you, Sean. I'd just like to add something about rules are rules. I agree. Airlines should be seen as a catalyzer, as a tool for development, social development, economic development in the countries. So the rules cannot come and put a buffer on it and suffocate airlines. Look, the same comparison I did with Satam. Leasing aircraft is becoming the solution because that's cheap capital. If you lease an aircraft, that aircraft is financed with European or American or Japanese capital. So we are running away from acquiring and building our balance sheet, because if you finance aircraft in the countries I work with, it's 18%, 20% interest rate versus 2-3%. So we have ways to go around this. So the rules should be protecting us from go in a nice format that develops the country, the airline, the assets in country. Sorry, I just wanted to add this because I think it's also an important matter. Thank you.
Absolutely, John. And let me add to that as well. What it actually winds up doing is forcing airlines into debt financing rather than being able to raise financing through equity. Consequently, the airlines wind up constraining their cash flow, and this is why so many African airlines fail, because they're unable to compete with they're unable to raise local capital at globally competitive rates, which forces them into debt financing more than they can really manage at startup phases, and consequently fail. So it's a vicious circle that goes all the way around. And it's these legacy views of ownership and ownership needing to vest with nationals of a country that certainly, while they are the laws, this is a good reason to say why these laws should be reviewed, and if not changed, at least liberalized to some extent, where 25% may become 49%, or something more palatable in terms of giving flexibility to airlines to raise capital from the international markets more flexibly.
Right, perfect. Let's park that one there. While you talk about Comair, there is a book called Crash and Burn that Joao and I have both read. That's quite interesting, by Glenn Orsman, who was the former CEO. I'm not recommending books, but I just thought about it. If you're interested in that story and you want to hear his side of the story, then you can find that book for sure. So we are going to move on now, and I want to start by just bringing something to Mr. Mendis's attention, which is back in July on this podcast, Sean was very bullish on AirAsia, and AirAsia actually started Nairobi last week from Kuala Lumpur. So I've never done this before, but just so all of our audience can enjoy listening to Sean maybe not being correct.
The fact that they're trying to do something that didn't work for them before, do the same thing in a different market and hope for a different result. And that is the textbook definition of insanity. So I'd love to see it succeed. I do not see it succeeding in its current avatar. In fact, I'd go far as to say that there's probably a 30% chance these flights never fly. I think that when they see how badly the pre-sales are doing by October, they're probably even going to pull a plug before it even flies. But 30% chance on that. I'll put $10 on it if someone wants to take the money.
All right. So where's the $10, Sean? So actually, he's doubled it because he's raising his debt finance at African prices. So it's now at $20. He's doubled the cost from July, right?
Indeed. I'm going to go ahead and I will be donating this to the AviaDev Africa Outreach Program, which will be joining. I don't know who the exact partner is going to be in Zanzibar next year, but it will be donated to them to join the other sponsors who will be contributing towards aviation education for the youth in the next host of AviaDev Africa conference.
Absolutely. And that institution is the Karume Institute of Science and Technology, training maintenance technicians and lots of other courses as well. So thank you for that, Sean. And after this, I'm sure you can go and have your lunch of humble pie. So yeah, do enjoy that. Let's move on. Ethiopian. We always talk about Ethiopian, but we've got some interesting stuff that isn't just network. There's always something to talk about. So there isn't just network. There's kind of three separate things. So I think the first thing to say that is particularly interesting is the idea of a new airline or a new joint venture in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is they're going to be sending 2 737 MAXs. They've named a CEO, and that is going to take flight in December, I believe, is the plan. So not far off. What do we know? Who'd like to kick us off on this one? I'm not sure who's best positioned. Sean, do you want to tell us?
Sure.
I'll give you the bare facts on it, and the bare facts are just as you've explained. Ethiopian and the government of DRC had in the past already signed an agreement for Ethiopian to take over management control of the dormant Air Congo, effectively, which is one of the 2 national airlines in Congo. Remember, there's Air Congo and there's Congo Airlines, both of which are government-owned, competing national carriers. That's something Joao knows something about, I'm sure. But yeah, so Ethiopian effectively is going to take over one of these. They're going to put in 2 737-800s. They put in a CEO who's actually a pretty respected person within Ethiopian's management team. That's Mesfin Biru. He's on the ground now in Congo as the CEO, and they're going to put these 2 737-800s and launch domestic flights by next month. And domestic in Congo is very easy to set up. It's not easy to set up, but it's straightforward if you have the government backing. Bring the planes, start flying. It's a very late booking market, so there's really not much need to do a lot of advance sale. But is it going to be successful? DRC is a very difficult place for anyone to do business, not least a foreign company. The market it's got infinite potential, basically. And Behramjee is itching to tell us why. So go on, Behramjee, give us numbers.
So the domestic Congo market, firstly, just to give people a heads up, it's heavily regulated by the government, but in the sense that it's allowed airlines to sell profitable fare levels. For example, the Kinshasa to Lubumbashi, which is the main trunk route in the Congo, DRC that is sold for $460 round trip, which the airline retains. That is the minimum economy class fare that the airline will retain. For Goma, it's $400 round trip retained to the airline, minimum. And those are the main 2 trunk routes. Kinshasa to Lubumbashi last year had about 260,000 passengers. The only way you could fly them is by taking a double daily FlyCAA operated airplane. They used to fly last year A320s and A330s on a daily basis each. And Goma was flown once a day, surprisingly with an A330 last year every day. Goma has half the demand as Lubumbashi for obvious reasons. Goma is basically a outstation port of the United Nations. It's very close to Rwanda, the border, and it's got a lot of internal law and order issues, which that's why it's not yet developed a lot. The demand last year was about 125,000 passengers non-stop to Kinshasa. How many flew via Kinshasa to other Congo cities from Lubumbashi and Goma, that no one knows. There's very limited data that comes out of the domestic Congo market in particular. But the potential, as Sean correctly pointed out, domestic Congo, according to me, is what Nigeria was under the Abacha regime 30 years ago in terms of development and current status. The reason I'm saying the Abacha regime is because once Abacha left power from Nigeria, their domestic market and travel within Nigeria exploded. I've seen that personally by working for Arik Air and what the other operators also did over there. And I feel that DRC is slowly getting there. Lubumbashi to Kinshasa, the point-to-point demand can easily be doubled if more frequencies are had, because right now those flights are full. It's very tough to get seats on it. As Sean correctly pointed out, the market is very late booking market. It's 48 hours booking cycle, literally speaking, from what I've done my research on. At least half the tickets are bought 48 hours and half the tickets are bought 24 hours before departure, except for Fridays and Sundays, for obvious reasons, weekend diplomats and people wanting to get out of Kinshasa, etc. If that country is allowed to develop itself organically, both politically and economically, it can be a huge boom period for airlines flying domestic as well as regional flights. So the surprising thing about the Congo market is that regionally within Africa, the demand is very low. The biggest regional market is Johannesburg, which is 45 to 55,000 passengers a year, which is nothing. Like Brazzaville, I think has some higher demand numbers. But apart from Johannesburg, the other big markets are just Nairobi and Addis Ababa, Entebbe, but not very high numbers. The higher numbers are for Dubai, Brussels, and Paris. So if another reason for the Africa numbers being low is because unlike its neighbor Brazzaville, where you get visa on arrival for Central African countries and few other West African countries, Kinshasa still needs visas for many Africans to enter the Congo. And it's a tedious process. It's not as easy as Brazzaville or Cameroon or even Gabon. So that also plagues the development of business and tourism into Kinshasa from Africa. However, they have now eased visa restrictions for Europeans. I believe you get a visa, e-visa within 72 hours if you're a European or American citizen, which is surprising because for Africans it's still a tedious process, but for the Europeans and Americans, it's much more easier. It's obviously catering to tourism dollars, which can be seen by the higher point-to-point figures which you get on the Paris and Brussels route over the last year compared to pre-COVID. So yeah, with regards to Ethiopian venture into the Congo, I see a lot of potential for it, but I also see a lot of risks. The risk is mainly the 51% stake that the Congo government has, because that means Ethiopian does not have a final say in everything. And as we know, unfortunately, through past historical mistakes made with Congo Airways, what are the other names that Congo Airways has, Sean? I don't know.
Airways, Air Congo, there've been a whole range of private and government carriers there.
Yeah, so the government does not have a very good track record at all. Ethiopia needs to manage them delicately, make sure they don't irritate them or get on their bad books, because anything can happen in a jiff in the Congo, as Kenya Airways found out the hard way in July when their crew were arrested for reasons which we still don't know why, but they were arrested for something or the other at the very last minute.
But that's a challenge of doing business with these joint ventures that Ethiopian have done. Traditionally, they can only take up to 49%. The one thing I was just going to ask, though, is Congo Airways have just taken two 737s, 737-800s from ClassJet. So they're now operating as well, or they will be for a 6-month period, I think. So the market, if you've got Ethiopian going in and you've got Congo Airways operating these 737s as well, there is some sort of capacity there as well. So it can handle that pretty easily, you reckon?
Yes, on the trunk routes.
The market has infinite demand.
Yeah, but the problem is Congo Airways has no proper GDS system. It's not accessible to the public outside of Congo. It's basically catering to point of sale Congo. So same thing with FlyCA. The good thing that Ethiopian should hopefully bring to their Air Congo project is to make it a proper airline, or at least a half decent airline. That point of sale overseas can be had. They can earn money in US dollars or in euros. Just make the Congo get more connected, more recognized from abroad.
Yeah.
Right now, they started the correct way by focusing on domestic routes.
No, because if you look in terms of it, one of Ethiopia's most successful new routes that they brought in on the night bank has been their Kinshasa. And being able to fly Kinshasa double daily from Addis and then have a feeder network throughout the DRC, early morning departures potentially from Kinshasa, then coming back lunchtime, leaving at lunchtime. That basically is connecting Kinshasa to the world, connecting all of DRC to the world via Addis and via Kinshasa. So I think this is also more than just, as you say, it's more than just the domestic thing. It makes points in Congo beyond just the Lubumbashi and Kinshasa, which have been the two major gateways. It'll make them also connectable to the entire world through the network that having an Ethiopian as a partner brings up. And one other point which I think I need to mention here, you mentioned Goma over there, but I'll tell you something from running a cargo airline in Uganda. There is a huge amount of cargo traffic that goes across the land border. So a lot of the traders who come into Uganda from China, from India, and places like that are actually from Congo. and they come into Uganda with their goods and take them across the land border into Goma and then distribute them by air from Goma to Kinshasa or throughout with the various Congolese cargo operators out there. And I think that is something as well which there is potential for. It may not necessarily be in the phase one where Ethiopian is looking at the passenger operation with 2738s, but I think having cargo access to secondary markets in the Congo is also somewhere where Ethiopian sees huge potential for their narrow body cargo freighters, whether immediately or in the next few years. I think that is definitely going to be part of Ethiopia's strategic position in this deal.
Perfect. Joao, we'd love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, sure. Let him speak.
Yes, thank you. I've spent a lot of time between the 95s and 2015 in the Congo, and it's a very complex country. First of all, from the ground, if you've been there, you can't travel between the destinations. Trucking is very difficult. There is, but it's terrible, the roads, and especially in the rainy seasons. Air transport is a must, an essential. And the market is huge. The buying power is amazingly quite good. There's people that travel monthly to Europe, and they need that connectivity. There is minerals in the east of the country. There is this conflict in the border with Rwanda. So there's United Nations presence there. There's a lot of market that potentially needs lift. Now, the problem is when it comes to airport navigation facilities, they are very limited and compromised in some cases, and they need to be accurate because it's I flew there in small aircraft in the cockpit of an airplane, and then it's really delicate to do it. So we need good quality. I'm very surprised, and now we were celebrating this last week, that ClassJet had delivered 2 airplanes, 737-800s, I believe, to Congo, which they really need. They need the lift. And last year, the Minister of Transport, I think, of Congo went to Ethiopia, and they signed an MOU to connect other destinations, I think like Lumumbashi, I'm not sure, they were specific. They changed the BASA to make sure that Ethiopia had more access to take out, because they have desperate needs to take people out to Dubai, to the Middle East, and to Europe. And that is one of the problems they need to solve. As part of that, I believe it's not going to be an airline that Ethiopia will have equity on to start with. It will be a management agreement, just like I think they're doing it in Sudan. It's a management agreement. They'll bring an executives, they'll bring equipment, they'll bring systems, know-how, like the GDS that Behramjee referred to. So they will help in all that. And that's one thing that I want to say. The problem with aviation in these countries is not the airline only. Sometimes it's even the least problem. The problem is government support, government interference, bank access to capital, health, tourism development. So this is what we need. It's across the board, airport facilities. So I believe that Ethiopia, having all the experience that Ethiopian has and the determination, they will be the help that the country needs, because potential is there, demand is there, just like Nigeria, like Angola, they need that. And this is what I believe Ethiopian will make happen, and I hope they do. And I think Sean said that the executive chosen, Mesfin, is a very good person. I know him quite well for many years.
Behramjee, last word. You look like you want to say something.
Yes, one thing though which has not been mentioned at all by Ethiopian nor the Congolese government is if there's any long-term plan of adding wide-body aircraft by Ethiopian to fly to Europe and Dubai from Kinshasa. They've always just stuck to the 737-800, which is the logical step, especially for the first 3 years, I would assume. But there's no long-term plan being disclosed. That's all I just want to say.
May I add, John, Ethiopian in their 2003 vision had defined that they wanted 4 main hubs in Africa, split within Africa. They were really sub-hubs to feed the Ethiopian hub. Remember, Ethiopian are now building an airport with 60 million plus 40 million capacity, and that is going to be fed by these operations. I think that, yes, just like they're starting now, more connectivity between other destinations in the country. Normally you say, I want to do one capital of each country in Africa. Now they're saying a second, and they go to a third one. But these will be feeding the hub in Addis and then deliver the passengers from there, just like they're trying to do in some other operations I am involved in, I cannot talk about. So it's really their strategy. And I believe, to answer the question, yes, there will be longer haul aircraft, not just domestic or sub-region. They will connect to the hub in Addis. If they're going to Europe or not, that will be a decision of Congo and Congo Airlines and the country in Congo to do. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's been thank you, Joao. And that's obviously been a bone of contention with some of the joint ventures they've done before. That a lot of people think, oh, I've got a national airline, I'm going to get direct flights from here to wherever. And actually, a lot of it initially, especially, is to feed Addis and then onto the world from there. With Ethiopian, we are going to stay here just shortly. When I was in Zanzibar last week, I had the pleasure of being part of the welcoming party for the A350-1000 on their first flight to Zanzibar. It wasn't the first flight of the aircraft, but it was only a week or so after they received it. So being the first African customer, that was something we wanted to mention. But also there is rumours, although I believe it's been delayed, the decision on a potential order of regional aircraft as well. And they're looking obviously in that sector as A220 or Embraer E2. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts on where you feel this is up to. I think Behramjee, you brought this one to the table, so you kick us off.
Sure. Just to give some historical context, in 2019, late Q4 2019, I believe so, the Ethiopian CEO had announced at that time that they were in the final stages of securing an A220 contract for Ethiopian. Around 20 units was the initial purchase that they were looking at to finalize. But unfortunately, COVID happened and the Pratt & Whitney engine issues crept up, which made everybody get a bit wary of the A220s in Africa in particular. As you now know, in Africa, Air Tanzania, Egypt, Air Senegal, they've all got rid of the A220 fleet. So Ethiopian wants some clarity first on that before making a final decision, which is the right way forward. But the topic over here is which aircraft is better suited for Ethiopian's operations. We have either the A220 or the Embraer E2 series. Now, what recently the CEO has stated is that these planes will replace the Q400s on their domestic as well as short-haul international operations. So over here, I feel both manufacturers actually have a 50-50 chance in terms of, if I'm being objective, because the Q400 is a 76-seater aircraft. The smallest A220, which is the Dash 100, will be 107 or 102 seats, which means about a 40% capacity increase. The E90, if Ethiopian gets that, would have 96 seats in a two-class configuration, which means about a 25% capacity increase. Both aircraft have two types of family variants inbuilt, the 220-100 and the 220-300. The 220-300 will also help support Ethiopian's hub network growth, especially the third and fourth hub wave banks on flights which do not need the capacity of a 737-800 or a MAX 8. And it's a much lower cost also to operate those aircraft. And the same thing that the E95 would also do, because the E95 just has 10 less seats in a two-class configuration versus the 20. But the best thing is, where the advantage that the Embraer holds is twofold. Number one, the capital cost to purchase the Embraer is far less than the A220. And the fuel consumption is about 10% less. The E2-195 consumes 1,700 kilograms of fuel per hour. And the A220, as per real-life statistics that I saw in Air Senegal, it consumes 1,900 kilograms fuel per hour operating. But since this is Africa, there's also on-ground realities, which is the two-piece baggage concept for all of Ethiopian's international routes. Domestic is one piece, but you have to look at the bigger picture. You can't just buy an aircraft just because it has to fly domestic, because Ethiopian is a hub carrier. So taking that into account in particular, I feel the A220, which is big with its bigger cabin belly cargo space, the A220 would have an advantage over there. And also it can fly 1 extra hour more than the Embraer. So the flexibility of having that additional flying range capability, as well as the undercarriage belly capacity for the baggage, especially to develop its third and fourth hub wave banks, I feel the A220 at the end of the day would win out versus the E2s. Plus, I remember Sean and I having this discussion a few months ago. Ethiopian also has some credits with the European Union, which Airbus can make use of in this regard. So both aircraft are very good, but the slight advantage, and I stress the word slight advantage, goes to the A220 in this category.
No,
Now,
great explanation.
The
I don't
A220-100.
necessarily disagree with you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think there's a couple of things which have changed since Ethiopian's position in 2019. Number one, I think is a very critical one, is that the fact that the A220 has a much longer production backlog than an E2 does. If they order an E2, they can get delivery within 12 months, while the A220, they're going to be waiting a few years, or are not going to get a substantial quantity of a fleet in a short period of time. They may get a few isolated whitetails or, other options or whatever that are not exercised. But for the most part, the A220 line is for now, for the immediate future. But also something which is pretty important and which has actually manifested itself in the way that these two products have evolved since 2019 is the fact that the E2 is Embraer's flagship product. And it continues to see product development, it continues to see improvement, it continues to see various enhancements to the model, while the A220 is quite simply Airbus's stepchild. And it is their lowest development and support priority. With all due respect to our friends at both Embraer and Airbus who listen regularly to this, hi guys, it's quite simple. The fact that the E2 is much more important to Embraer, and having someone as Ethiopian as a customer on board would be much more critical to Embraer than it would be to have to have an existing Airbus customer with a whole pile of 350s on order and everything else, to just top it up with 10 plus 10 A220s. But also, which is also to note, you mentioned these things about the range and so forth, and I was doing some numbers this morning. Since 2019, the E2 has had a increased MTOW and has also had the new automated takeoff system which has been installed there, which actually puts the range of the E2 now at over 3,000 nautical miles. And effectively, the A220 and the E2 both now have a range similar to the 737-800 and the MAX. So there is very few places in Africa, within the Middle East, pretty much everywhere. Most of Europe as well can now be flown non-stop from Addis Ababa with either an E2 or an A220. And I think the other point where the E2 has a bit of an advantage is it has demonstrated better hot and high capabilities. So the E2 has less of a performance degradation at altitude, which certainly, while it may not be as much of an issue at the new airport, which will be about 2,000 feet lower than the current Bole airport, but nonetheless, it'll still be 5,000 plus feet above sea level. And consequently, the E2, again, I don't have the numbers over here, but looking at what the E2's advantage has been at, say, a Johannesburg versus the A220 in terms of performance capabilities and performance degradation, I expect that at a similar 5,000 to 5,500 foot ASL airport, the E2 could actually have less of a performance hit than the A220 does. So it's not necessarily as open and shut as it may appear to be on the surface. Certainly, there is a difference in the baggage, in the cargo hold capability. We're talking about, I think, between 22 and 30 cubic meters is the difference. So it's about a 25% at least difference in terms of how much space. Certainly, the A220 has more passengers as well. So on a per capita basis, maybe a little bit affected. But at the same time, they both of them bring something to the table. The biggest disadvantage that both of them have is actually common, which is the issues with the PW-GTF engine. And Pratt & Whitney has actually behind the scenes, it's been a bigger mess than Boeing has been. And Boeing gets all the bad publicity in terms of, this production stopped, this and everything else. But if you look in terms of the amount of airlines, whether that's Indigo in India, whether that's Spirit in the US, whether that's KLM with their E2s, Air Senegal, Tanzania, the amount of airlines that have been messed up by this Pratt & Whitney GTF engine and Pratt's inability to support it properly. I know this is something that Joao is going to come in and comment on for us, given his experience in that area. But Pratt & Whitney has dropped the ball over the last decade. And truly, while people say Boeing has lost the plot, Pratt has. Boeing may not know where they're going. Pratt doesn't even know where they are.
So I think... go on, Behramjee.
Isn't Pratt & Whitney now banned in India in engines?
No,
because I remember
Indigo reached a settlement with Pratt where they received money, and now everything's all happy and they're friends again. But it still has affected Indigo's ability to grow as much as they wanted to. And in fact, from an African perspective, that's what's effectively has caused Indigo essentially only serving Nairobi and Mauritius out of all the potential African destinations they should have been hitting by 2024 or 2025.
No, because I read DGCA wrote something on LinkedIn over the summer because they cited Indigo grounding 69 airplanes because of the Pratt & Whitney issue, and that there was some big thing involving Pratt & Whitney and the DGCA, where DGCA was encouraging airlines who are ordering the A320s to now switch to CFM engines.
There is no ban on it because Indigo continues to operate them in very large quantities. So that is there is certainly
we've gone to India now,
anyone in their right
Behramjee,
mind right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, anyone in their right mind wouldn't use Pratt right now without a airtight performance guarantee on it. And but said the problem you have is when you have a fleet of 300 with Pratt, 301 with Gs doesn't really with the CFMs doesn't really solve the problem of 1 to 299.
Yeah, so before, I think Joao maybe wants to come in, but I just want to give him the caveat of you absolutely don't have to come in on this. Joao is somebody who used to work for Pratt and is involved, worked in Ethiopia, and obviously is friends like me with the Airbus guys and the Embraer guys, but you're very welcome. So it's your call.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you very much. And like I said, I worked 20 years for Pratt. I worked a bit of the development, or I followed the development of the engine while I was there. I grabbed that gearbox in my hand. I love the engine concept. But Sean is right. The Pratt & Whitney dropped the ball in terms of support, in terms of assuring operations. And we had Egypt Air with 100% of the fleet grounded of A220s, and Tanzania with 60% of the fleet grounded. So it was a disaster, and it still is. Angola has just taken a delayed delivery and is delaying more because they don't want to get involved into this grounding of aircraft waiting for engines available from the shop. So it is a big issue, and like Sean said, it's common to both fleets, both operate with the same engine. Now, talking about the airplanes, and again, I have friends in both sides, and I love both products. And it was said here, and it's very important. When this competition started in Ethiopia, there was a gap, a considerable gap between the standard of the 192 and the A220. It was a much better product, the A220. Now, Embraer developed, because like Sean said, it's their baby, it's their future. And they can also deliver faster or quicker, I should say. Ethiopia, and this is what I want to say because I was there during the whole expansion program, are very strict about when they do product review, when they compare two aircraft. It's amazing, two products. It's amazing what they do. When I got there in 2003, by the way, Ethiopian had 8 aircraft in 2003. Okay, and then we started looking at their expansion. Anything that was not a Boeing was not an aircraft, was not a jet aircraft. But now, yes, they went to Airbus. So now they will consider a non-Airbus product, obviously. I believe that they will not make a decision until these problems are solved. They don't want to live again with what they had with the A350, the 787, where they have 2-3 aircraft on the ground because there's no engines available for them to operate. And this is what I wanted to say. We need to give him some more time. I understand that they are bain-marie with the decision. And when they see that, yes, there is a go, they will announce a decision. And important issues were mentioned. I think Behramjee said the cargo capacity, 72% or 74% of their passengers are through Addis, and they come from international flights with 2 bag pieces allowed. They have to go out with 2 pieces. You can't drop that. And also but Ethiopian are very good. And I was sitting next to the person that does that analysis last week, and they will look into everything, including the cost of operation, the cost of capital, and all that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a huge decision. Thanks. I'm very conscious of where we're at the moment with the time and how many things we've got to get through. So we'll do a couple are actually relatively quick, I think, although I've said that before. And the first one, I think, again, is quite closely related to what we just talked about because of engine issues, which is the not so great news that we covered the announcement that Virgin was going to start Accra pretty recently, and that's now looking like it's going to be delayed, and that has been put down in part to engine issues with Rolls-Royce. Is that fair, Sean? Is that right?
Yeah, that is effectively the root cause of it. Virgin, well, the root cause is that Virgin is going to have 2 aircraft out of service next year summer when they plan to launch the route, and therefore they had to sacrifice something out of their new routes, which they had announced, which were Accra, Riyadh, Tel Aviv, Restart, Toronto, and they had a range of new routes. Of all of these, Accra was unfortunately the weakest. And we discussed this before when we covered the launch. The Accra market is 250,000 passengers a year between the UK and Ghana. Of that, British Airways is currently transporting about 190,000 passengers a year with 11 flights a week now, 4 to Gatwick, daily to Heathrow. And for Virgin to come in with another 198,000 seats in that market with very poor connectivity on the Heathrow side, given their schedule, was a very ambitious plan from the beginning. And I had my doubts as to whether that plan would have been successful for them. And obviously they did as well, because when it came to having to sacrifice something, this was the first thing that they chose to sacrifice before it even got a chance to take flight. But one thing also to note in that market is it's not just Virgin. And British Airways is also reducing their services to Accra next summer. They're currently operating 11 flights a week. They're going to be reducing that down to 10 flights a week, once again being blamed on Rolls-Royce engine issues, which is causing them to have to remove some of their aircraft from service as well next summer. This is something that's widespread. It's happening all over the world. It's not just happening on flights to Africa. They're cutting routes to Dallas, Fort Worth, for example. They're BA is pulling entirely out of that and leaving that to their joint venture partner, American Airlines, and so forth. And I think it's this supply chain things are not just in manufacturing of new planes, it's also in maintenance of components on the aircraft, like the engines. And so Pratt & Whitney's got issues. GE's had its share of issues. Rolls has issues. It's not one is better than the other, just that Pratt is worse than all of them right now, given the way they've been doing things the last decade or so. And I say this as a former Pratt customer.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's something we've heard from a route development perspective all year and for the last couple of years, which is the airlines saying, do you know what, you've got a really compelling business case, we'd love to fly, but actually with our capacity issues and with all the planned maintenance, we have to prioritize the routes that make us the most money or whatever, or work best for us. And it's creating quite a bit of frustration from a route development perspective, of course. But what we're hoping is if that can be, the maintenance side of it can be fixed and the supply chain can be fixed and the aircraft can start to be produced, then we'll see this sort of explosion of new routes coming. And that doesn't mean that, of course, with AviaDev, we want people to still come and have those conversations, because this is a long-term game, but it is often nobody's fault directly. The airlines would like to do it if they could get access to the aircraft. So I think that topic's pretty cut and dried. So I'll introduce the next topic, and if there is anything you guys want to mention on the Virgin side. But the next thing, and I'll come to you with this one, Behramjee, is Uganda Airlines, because they've been covered extensively on the podcast, I think every month for the last 5 or 6 months, talking about an impending launch to London, but we also hear they're now leasing in an A320 from DAT. So what's this all about? And we've covered the history of this with the A320 they had from Global. And what's the latest on London, I suppose? We'll cover that. But yeah, go Behramjee, talk to us about Uganda.
Regarding London, what has been seen with the slot report is that apparently they've been granted 4 weekly slots into London Gatwick with a morning arrival and a morning departure back. So the same plane can be used to rotate the airplane because it's less than a 24-hour rotation cycle. That's the good part. The bad part is that because the timing of the London flight is different from the Dubai and the Bombay, the connections that will be possible via Entebbe will not be available on all the flights in both directions. So they will have to have a split schedule in order to feed Bombay, London, and Dubai in particular. Obviously, London is the more riskier flight because it's the longest flight in their network. It has the second highest point-to-point demand after Dubai. It has actually 1/3 of Dubai's demand. London last 12 months, 77,000 passengers flew point-to-point between London and Entebbe. But the caveat in London for Uganda Airlines and any East African carriers to connect via the hub to Harare, Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, Zanzibar, etc. I don't feel that the caveat is to connect Johannesburg and Cape Town because the competition is way, way too high for that. The yields are also much lower for a one-stop operator because they're fighting against everybody else. Ugandan Airlines needs to focus on East Africa rather than Southern Africa for the London flights, according to me. But it will be a very big challenge because they don't have the number of aircraft required to have a proper feeder network. and also they don't have the correct type of aircraft for a feeder network for London, because the CRJ 900 that they have currently for the feeder network cannot accommodate two-piece baggage allowance. No way. If maximum it can accommodate is about 45 passengers with a two-piece baggage, if every passenger has a two-piece baggage permission on checked-in, but it's the wrong type of aircraft, unfortunately. The government needs to really understand if they really want to make this airline be half successful or not. When half successful, because it's very unlikely it's going to be net profitable. So let's be very realistic. Half successful means it has to be run commercially the right way. The CRJs are good for certain regional markets and domestic flying, but they need a proper narrow-body aircraft within the next year to feed Bombay, Dubai, and London properly. And for that, either the 737 or the A320, or if they want to take a punt, the E90, E2, E95, E2 also is there. But that plane will struggle to fly to Dubai, so the flexibility is not there, nor can it fly to Bombay.
Aren't I right in hearing that there's A220s and 787s were on the list, Sean?
Uganda Airlines has become a bit like our Emirates to Lagos was. It's something that we probably need to. Uganda Airlines to London. Is it happening? Is it not happening? We hear so many media reports and conjectures and statements from Jennifer here and statement from Ade there and everything else, which we pieced together. But as Behramjee said, they've been allocated slots. The slots occur for winter season into summer season, but most recently Jennifer said that it will start in March. Presumably that's going to be summer season. The reality is they had their A320 from Global, which has gone back to lessor at the start of this month, and without having a narrow body, without having either 737 or an A320 to cover their routes, they don't have enough aircraft to be able to operate the A330 to London, Dubai, Mumbai, and Lagos. Quite simply, they need to have a wet lease or dry lease, presumably a wet lease, so given the timelines here. But this DAT aircraft is going to be very critical for them to redeploy, certainly for commercial reasons on the Johannesburg route, because the CRJ cannot do Johannesburg with any sensible payload, and the A330 also cannot do Johannesburg with any sensible payload, for two extremes both being ridiculous. But that Lagos route works well for them. It doesn't work well for them, but it works less badly for them on 737/A320 than flying an A330 3/4 empty 90% of the time, which is what they're currently doing. Their 330, other than Dubai, is an absolute disaster. And London will probably be closer to Dubai in terms of ability to fill that aircraft up, but there's no way in hell they can make money using that aircraft. And this airline is doomed to commercial failure. It may not necessarily be failure in terms of shutting down. As long as the government continues to throw money at it, they can keep running forever, like most national airlines do. But this airline, the albatross dragging this airline down is, or the crane dragging this airline down are these two A330neos. They are planes which quite simply do not make sense for this airline, given the business model they have, given the market they have, given the stage of their development that they are at. And I can only hope that London will help stem some of that rot rather than be the solve the problem. What's going to solve it, as Behramjee says, as they themselves have admitted in many public statements, is an order for narrow bodies. But given the politics in Uganda, CAA, and I say that having been the accountable manager for an airline in Uganda, the politics in Uganda CAA at a whole different level than even most other African CAAs. So it is a mess that they have to operate in, and I wish them well. They're good friends of mine, they're clients of mine. I'd love to see them succeed, but the chips are stacked very heavily against them, and I don't see any of the moves they are making right now being the solution, but rather just steps in the right direction. That's all you can get.
Thank you very much.
Take the wins.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And anything you want to add, Joao, or shall we go to the next?
Yeah, just a small one. I understand that one of the reasons for the delays of the London flight was a TCO by EASA to allow them to give them the authorization to fly. And I understand that's sorted out now. But I go with Sean. Is there a reason? Is there a justification to do this flight to London, or is it going to be like one of the other flights that they have with the A330, where they're draining a lot of the cash? So they should look into that and relook at their business model. maybe find a nice sub, find a nice IT partnership, code share with another carrier, and do a consolidation in that sense with them. This is in a very few words what I would like to say.
Joao, you run national. We've all three of us have been involved with government-owned national airlines. Commercial and government priorities are not always. The Venn diagram is a very small overlap between them. That is just unfortunately the reality of a government-owned airline in Africa. Africa is not built to be launch customers for aircraft types, and support is lacking. The ability to get parts in and out, there's a wide range of logistics which simply are substandard in Africa relative to the rest of the world, and why African airlines should not look at being launch customers if they're looking at also maintaining high reliability operationally. Unless they're the size of Ethiopian, who can realistically are an economy in themselves. But African airlines should not look at that. They should look optimally at tried and tested and proven models which have a proven global support structure, both in personnel, both in third-party supply chains for parts and things as such, which you do not have on the NEO. The reason why they're losing so much money is because they're stuck with Rolls-Royce Total Care on their engines. And you don't have a choice because there is no other option. There's no third party who can support Rolls-Royce engines on an A330neo. They're stuck with Rolls. They're stuck with whatever terms they have on their Rolls-Royce agreement over there. And knowing Rolls-Royce and, having been pitched Total Care by them, it's never going to be something that they can make money on given the current utility of those aircraft. So it's the reality of it. They got too greedy at the beginning for various reasons. It may have been Airbus brainwashing them. My understanding is that decision actually came to them from above. It wasn't necessarily even Airbus who wanted to sell them the NEO as much as it was the president's office saying, look, Rwanda has 200s and 300s. Give me something newer than that. And this is, again, a problem that you have sometimes when there is national interests being prioritized above commercial ones.
Yes, but national office, the president's office must have seen also the price tag of the A330-800 versus the price tag of the other competing aircraft. So the A330-800 must have been sold or offered at a very attractive price, which would be too good to pass up. But unfortunately, the president's people do not look at the long-term picture of engineering, maintenance, etc., etc. They would just look at the price tag and see, hope for all the best. That's a typical government mentality, unfortunately.
All right. We may be speculating, but we'll see how much of that makes the final edit. But let's move on. Another favourite. So let's talk about Air Tanzania. So they last week have announced they've appointed a new CEO following the previous CEO's retirement. They are going to resume flights very soon at the end of this month, the end of November, 5 times a week to Johannesburg using their 737 MAX 9 aircraft, I believe. Is it going to work? It seems like a good route to try, but what do we think?
Let's start first with the new CEO. I think that is something that one hopes would bring a change of direction to the organization. I've never met Ladislas Matindi, but I will say that this man has staying power. For the number of scandals that Air Tanzania has been embroiled with internationally, domestically, for the amount of times he's allegedly been suspended and allowed back into office, the fact that he's been able to make it through to retirement deserves congratulations. I take my hat off to him. He's had a very long career. He's been the forever man in Air Tanzania. And I wish him a good retirement to that. But hopefully there will be a change in the commercial priorities and the way that airline operates going forward with new leadership. But regarding the Johannesburg flights, this is a very interesting one because they used to fly this route until 2019. And then one morning in I remember this because I actually landed in Johannesburg that morning and saw that they had a plane which was being seized by bailiffs at Johannesburg Airport. And there's a long legal imbroglio around that, but the basic story was that there was a Namibian farmer who was owed money by the Tanzanian government, and because all of Air Tanzania's fleet is not owned by the airline itself, but rather owned by a Tanzanian government entity called TGFA, Tanzania Government Flight Agency, effectively they were able to use their debt owed to them or allegedly owed to them by the Tanzanian government to seize an aircraft operated by Air Tanzania and attach it towards that debt. Now, that was subsequently overturned by the Gauteng court, in South Africa, but it was not overturned because they felt that there was a problem with this logic, that the way that Tanzania government flight agency owns the planes, the court did not rule that the planes were immune from seizure. They just ruled that in this particular case, there were irregularities in the procedure under which the debt was claimed in South Africa. So the reality is, when they restart this route, if somebody else has a debt against the government, owed to them by the government of Tanzania, the aircraft will once again be able to be attached based on the precedent which was found there. So that is an interesting thing to keep in mind, noting that this is going to be a 737-900 while previously it was an A220. But also to note very critically about this route is, while certainly, and BG will give us the numbers now about what DAR to Johannesburg O&D market is, I think the way this flight is scheduled is that it connects directly to Mumbai both ways. So this flight is scheduled that it's got about an hour or less, I think, one direction connections at Dar es Salaam from the Mumbai route. Mumbai to Johannesburg is the second largest unserved route in Africa right now, and I think Air Tanzania, with their schedules, will be offering the lowest elapsed time, the quickest possible connection between Johannesburg and Mumbai. And I don't see that as just a coincidence, given the schedule that they put in place for these new flights that will be starting at the end of November.
Behramjee, have you got your numbers?
Yes. Johannesburg to Dar es Salaam last year, point to point, was 62,000 passengers. So I would say a medium-sized market, high volume like Nairobi, Joburg, etc., but decently sized. Already one airline flies it non-stop. But for Air Tanzania, it serves two purposes. One for point-to-point, and second also to connect Zanzibar and Dubai and Bombay to the network, as well as Lagos eventually. Tanzania, it's a
and also keep in
purpose.
mind that South African Airways is also, they were supposed to have already relaunched their Dar es Salaam flights. Those have been postponed till the end of January, I believe. Last I checked on it, says this is due to crew training and so forth. Exactly. And the short notice launch, because these Air Tanzania flights have only come in with a 6-week advance notice period. The relatively short notice on this may be partly to get a first mover advantage versus SAA, because Airlink also is flying that route right now. In fact, they are the only non-stop player in that route right now.
Yeah,
so I think this is trying to get I think Airlink is actually increasing frequencies to Dar as well. They're doing a couple of additional frequencies a week as well, all more or less at the same time. So I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely targeting the beyond market as much as it's targeting just the plain O&D.
Yeah, great. Joao?
Yeah, if I may say, starting by the CEO, it's a coincidence. He comes from the communications industry, I believe, and he's been the CEO, chairman of the board, etc. Just like Vuyani, if you remember, in South African Airways was there, and he started quite well. He brought a lot. I'm very excited about the ICT side, about the GDS, PSS, innovation, control of revenue leakage, increase of distribution, etc., which really is what I was not seeing. I'm very close to Ladislau. I talk to him almost on a monthly or a weekly basis, and I think that what this new CEO can bring is that Paul, I believe, is called, and so that is to say about the CEO. I know nothing more about him. I don't know him, and I wish him all the best. Perhaps Ladislaus will be there to contribute with some inputs. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but I hope that he gets a good group of people, aviation connected and experienced, to help him, and that exists in Tanzania, in the region. Now, in terms of the flights, and the flight, specifically the flight to Joburg, a little bit was said here, but I hope that it's going to concentrate mainly on beyond Dar es Salaam, because like Airlink are already serving the route. There are Airlink flight to Zanzibar. I believe that FlySafair also offers Zanzibar. So that point-to-point is served. They need to go to Mumbai, to China, with a good product beyond Dar es Salaam, and also find a good IET or a partner in South Africa to distribute from Joburg, and not just sleep on that, okay, I'm doing a flight. I think that the short notice is also bad. It's something that might go against them. They will fly a while without high loads, but in the end, I hope that they can offer that service beyond the O&D. Thank you very much.
They've
Behramjee?
flown with bad loads on so many of their routes for so long. That's something they're just used to.
Yeah, sorry, I agree and disagree with Zhao's thing, because number one, if Air Tanzania focuses on beyond markets, mainly out of Joburg, the yields are very lower comparatively to point. So if they need to focus more on the Tanzania home market first and use the transit market as bonus incremental feed, because at the end of the day, for the transit market feed to Dubai, Mumbai, and eventually London, they're competing against much more established players who offer double to triple daily flights via their hubs, whereas Air Tanzania would only be offering 3 to 4 flights a week in both directions. So they will be playing against very big carriers already. So the core focus should be on the Tanzania home market first, because of the higher revenue retention that it can get, and the transit market should be the secondary focus for them. The big problem, a lot of African carriers and certain the big problem a lot of Middle East carriers in particular have, who don't have a very big home market base, is that they focus a lot on the transit market, but then they have a lot of infinite access to capital, whereas Air Tanzania does not. So the more you focus on transit market, the lower your yield is also, because you're competing against much more carriers on that. That's what I wanted to say.
No, I agree. And what Behramjee is, they should not rely only on the O&D will be a good source of revenue. Just Uganda, for example, I think they're doing that. They're offering a very low fare for connecting into Entebbe to go to Dubai. But I still think that their main source of income should be the O&D. And this is what Air Tanzania should do. Because India is not very well served, by the way. The best connection, I understand, is via Addis to the Indian destinations, and Emirates also. But yeah, I agree with you. It's the main source of the revenue should be that, the O&D, but they should not stop there. They should go to the beyond and create a market there as well.
Yeah, great. I think we looked at the Indian market in focus, the India Africa market in focus was last month. And that is, we want to do a little market focus now before we close up. So we've got about 10 minutes or so before the end of the podcast, but we wanted to look at Saudi to Africa. And because there's so much chat around the new players and their growth, the orders they're putting in, that sort of thing. So I think the thing that sparked this is that Flynas have announced that from January, they're going to start serving Entebbe and Djibouti. But also this month, we saw that Riyadh Air, that is yet to start operations, but has ordered 60 A321s at the end of October. So just after we recorded the previous episode. So the question here is, what is the impact on Africa? How much focus will there be on Africa from the Saudis? And they want global domination. You can't ignore it, but will we see it?
Who should start?
Sean? Behramjee, you want to give us the numbers?
Why this one? You start, Alan.
Okay. So Riyadh, they ordered about a couple of weeks ago 60 A321 Neos. They've not broken down the number of LRs, XLRs, and regular Neos. But for a lot of Africa, they would be just requiring a normal Neo as well as LRs. They don't need an XLR for any African route. There are surprisingly some good markets in Africa for Riyadh to look into, which have a decent amount of point-to-point demand, as well as they'll be able to connect Riyadh in the future to their European, US, and Far East Asia network. So for the A320, another good thing is the A321 offers Riyadh Air a very low risk option to expand into Africa versus using a wide body aircraft. The aircraft can fly 5.5 to 6 hours nonstop with a full payload out of Riyadh to Eastern as well as Central and West Africa. So no issues over there. The LR can fly an extra 1 hour more. So the aircraft itself is ideally suited for Riyadh Air to expand in a low-risk manner into Africa. Places such as Lagos, Abuja, Accra, Entebbe, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Zanzibar are all, I would say, good future potential routes, especially in particular for them, Lagos and Abuja. I would say so because of the onward transit market to Jeddah and Medina, plus as well as for GCC. The only problem is getting money out of Nigeria, because majority of that sale will be done in Nigeria. Whereas when it comes to East Africa, though, there's a big labor market now coming into Saudi Arabia from Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Entebbe to Riyadh, which Flynas has just announced last year, much to my surprise as well, had 52,000 passengers flying point to point. So that's a market that can be stimulated further. It's mainly labor market. Nairobi, Riyadh is another market, which I'm surprised that Kenya Airways does not fly to. They had 60,000 passengers point to point. So another good market for them, for Riyadh to look into with the A321s. Other markets in sub-Saharan Africa that can be of good use which is not mainland Africa, but Mauritius also can be flown with the LR from Riyadh, maybe even with an XLR to ensure that the payload is decent. Riyadh, Mauritius had about 16,000 passengers point to point last year, but Mauritius will depend a lot on European feed. So they will, if they do fly to Mauritius, which Saudi flies to currently, they will make sure that they time it well to connect via Riyadh to Europe. But overall, I would say for Riyadh Air, this aircraft is ideally suited to expand in Africa in a more commercially oriented manner rather than using those 789s. Because I don't think so any African route apart from Joburg and Cape Town would get the 789 from Riyadh Air. African sub-Saharan. Obviously, Cairo, I would assume, Cairo and Casablanca would get the 789. Casablanca also, I think in the winter low season, they could get the XLR or the LRs because the demand greatly dips from Saudi to Casablanca during that period. So those are the opportunities I feel that Riyadh Air has with this aircraft in Africa in particular.
Amazing. Thanks, Behramjee. That's really comprehensive. Joao, what do you think about Saudi and Africa?
Okay, Saudi. I'll talk about both Flynas and Riyadh. It's amazing their ability, the access to capital, their expansion plan. And what I see here is that it's a huge plan. It's not just like a point-to-point flight. They're talking about, I think it's called EP Pilgrim Experience, something like that. So they'll be concentrated on Hajj, Umrah, promoting this. And instead of these charter flights, many people would rather go on a scheduled flight. It's safer, it's comfortable, more predictable. So that is what they'll do. But also tourism. It's amazing what they're doing already, coming to places like Mozambique for different experiences for the Saudi people, and also to promote tourism, which I didn't know. I knew only a little bit about what the historical tourism sites, in Saudi Arabia are. They want to open visas, open access, and also labor. There's a lot of labor moving between the two, not just basic labor, but high-intensive labor in terms of the airports. Silicon Valley they're building there, and an aviation city they're building there. So it's a very good story to tell, and I believe they will be successful. Like you've seen, they've started already the Entebbe, Djibouti flights, and also Riyadh. Behramjee said they have the right equipment to offer better than the Emirates and the Etihads and the Qatars. The size is right to go point to point rather than hubs and then distribute.
Yeah, Sean, what your final points on this one?
I am sick and tired of hearing about Riyadh Air. Let them actually start flying, and I will share more views about them, because quite honestly, it's like my entire LinkedIn feed is like, oh my God, look what Riyadh Air did. They are a paper airline. They are no different than James Asquith's Global Airlines. At least Global Airlines has an actual aircraft right now, even if it's a giant paperweight. So certainly, there is huge potential for Saudi market to Africa. I think Riyadh Air is the most overhyped nonsense that I've had to deal with this entire year, and I can only wait for the moment until they actually have planes and they can focus on running an airline, which hopefully will mean that they'll be less chirpy about, oh my God, look, we're sponsoring a football team. Oh, look, we're sponsoring this. Oh, look, we're doing that. Fly a damn plane before you start calling yourself an airline. Thank you. That's all.
Just to add, Sean, I know it is, but I remember going in '86 to Dubai, and they had 3 737s leased to GCAS or something like that. They decided to go big, and they did. And you're right, you need to first show an airplane. It looks like they're getting there.
They had 3 737s in Emirates. Emirates started flying before they started making a big noise about we're the greatest things in sliced bread. We've been hearing about Riyadh Air for how many years now? Year and a half at least. Everyone knows what their uniforms look like, what their planes are going to look like, what everything is, except for the fact they don't actually have planes or uniforms or anything else. It is truly, it's like cryptocurrency. It's just in the ether kind of thing. Let it actually fly, then we will give it the dignity it deserves. For now, the dignity it deserves is to be consigned to the internet meme space. Thank you.
I think, look, it's actually very smart marketing, right? Before you launch, we know it will happen. They've got loads of money. Why not do it? Because then when they launch, they don't have to go through that process of trying to tell people who they are and what they're doing and what they look like.
Great.
But I know it's a lot of cash.
Give them the time of day.
All right. Let's scratch that one from the next episode. Right, we've got a couple of final things just to cover, but one is particularly important because it's a new national airline of types, which we haven't discussed much before, which is Air Sierra Leone, who unveiled a ERJ 145. We saw that on social media, but there's also talk about using a wet lease 737-8 aircraft to serve the London market. They've got technical assistance from, is it XEJet? Is that how you say it? Or ZJet? I don't know. From Nigeria.
XEJet in Nigeria.
XEJet in Nigeria. So, Sean, tell us, what's the story here? Because there's been a couple of stories about London and different things.
This is one I'm really excited about because XEJet is a friend and a client of mine, and I actually helped them with the feasibility study for the Sierra Leone project some months ago. So it's great to see it actually coming into reality because there's so many projects that come up that remain on paper, like we are there, but this one actually has planes and is flying now. But yes, Air Sierra Leone is basically XEJet in Nigeria, an Embraer 145 operator, which is going to be putting one aircraft initially, one 145, to fly regional routes from Freetown, and will be partnering with a wet lease 737 MAX from early December to fly basically semi-charter, so scheduled charter kind of operations between the UK and Sierra Leone with the UK-based operator. We've looked in terms of what the size of the markets are and everything else and where the current market share is. The brief thing, without going into the deep numbers, because I've got all the numbers here, but that's buried in a report. The brief reality is at peak season, there is plenty of demand. In fact, there's too much demand between the UK and Sierra Leone, primarily with families and the VFR traffic, so that is spilling significantly, where people are literally flying Addis Ababa, Accra, double changes, 3 changes to come into Sierra Leone at peak periods. While in the off-peak, there is a scarcity of demand. In February, you couldn't give away tickets. So the plan generally is to focus on that O&D during the peak season at Christmas time until the end of, say, January, and then when that slacks off, to have this regional network with the Embraer 145 distributing, and you pick up 5 passengers from here, 5 passengers from there, whether it's Monrovia, Conakry, whatever, connecting into London. That really makes the difference between covering your operating costs and bleeding everywhere. It's a solid concept. The execution and the devil's going to be in the details, however they can get distribution, execution, and whatever else. But I'll tell you, having worked on that, on the numbers myself, the numbers do make sense. And the guys at XEJet are extremely competent. They've got experience in Nigeria, outside Nigeria with international airlines and so forth. So these are not your typical... The government is also pretty hands-off. They've told them this is the strategic objectives, go ahead and take the risk and make it happen. So this is going to be run commercially. It's going to be run commercially by people who actually know what they're doing. Certainly there are challenges in the business environment, but I'm more optimistic about this actually coming to pass because it is effectively a private sector driven project with the government's backing rather than a government driven project which invariably winds up in some sort of failed boondoggle.
Right, fantastic. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up very shortly, but I just wanted to open the floor. I think the one other one that Behramjee wanted to talk about was Fly Dubai, but before that, Joao, I think, would like to make a little contribution.
Okay, on this Sierra Leone, again, I think, and Sean said, it's great that the private sector comes in, the government is behind them, supporting. From what I read, they're getting the right support, and I myself am working with an ACMI operator for A330s, and that's our intention, is to fill the gaps when there is a demand. We are there and train the local people, do a dump lease, train cabin attendants if needed be. So it's really a very good formula to avoid drainage of cash and to increase the access to revenue when it's possible. needed.
That is such a large market. UK to Sierra Leone is a very large market. I mean, we're talking 60,000 odd, give or take, passengers a year, and it doesn't have direct service. So it is, and in fact, not only does it not have direct service, it doesn't have particularly convenient indirect service. You're making legs via Kenya or via Casablanca and things like that, which are not even not simple connections available like many other markets where there isn't direct service. So it has been crying out to be served. It has been served by a number of airlines in the past, both from the African side, and I say African because it's not just Sierra Leone. Even Bellevue of Nigeria used to fly Freetown to Heathrow in the 2000s, and of course on the UK side, everything from BCAL, BA, BMI, everybody has flown that route. So the market is there. It's just that it's not being served right now, and there is a void which an opportunity has been taken to try and capture that niche. So it's been successful before for various people. There's no reason it shouldn't be successful again if you can put the right cost structure and revenue capture in to ensure it stays focused and does its job.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Final words. Behramjee, you just wanted to cover Fly Dubai?
There were two airlines, Fly Dubai and ITA.
Okay. But let's not. I said the ITA. Let's push that one.
Yeah, let's keep ITA for next month.
Okay, fine. So Fly Dubai, they haven't announced, but it has been detected on the GDS that they have quietly, and I stress the word quietly because it's very unlike Fly Dubai not to promote this, that they're increasing their Addis Ababa flights from daily to double daily effective December 1st, as per what has been published on Sabre and Amadeus. So the Addis Ababa Dubai market, as per the stats that I have last year, is the biggest labor market point to point between sub-Saharan Africa and Dubai, coming in at 403,000 passengers a year. That was last year, the last 12 months. But surprisingly also for a 4.5-hour flight, the yields are also quite decent. It's $350 one way with YQ included, and without government taxes, obviously. Ethiopian currently flies 3 times a day on that route using wide bodies. Emirates, surprisingly, only flies once a day, and Fly Dubai is now increasing to twice a day. Emirates, though, has a different focus for Addis Ababa compared to for Ethiopian. Emirates is more focused on the long-haul O&Ds out of Addis Ababa rather than the point-to-point market. They have a different outlook for Addis, unfortunately. Ethiopian is more focused on the point-to-point as well as feeding its core African markets. That's why they have 2 daily wide-body flights within 1 hour of each other between 10 and 11 at night, because they can't fill everybody from Africa on that 10 o'clock flight, so they have another flight departing an hour later. So that's the main reason for that, obviously. They don't have an A380. They're not stupid enough to buy an A380 just to operate on one route.
No, just to get a little more technical on that, it's not just that, it's actually the elapsed time. Because if you look in terms of what the schedule is for those, there are some markets which do not connect to ET600 outbound, and there's some markets which do not connect off ET613 inbound. So they actually need to have, similar to what they do with the Cape Town, they need to have that staggered schedule where the early arrivals get sent out on ET600 to Dubai and then come back on ET601, while the later ones go out on 612 and then can come back on 613. So it's not just capacity. A single large aircraft wouldn't work for them in this case, even if they did have it. They'd be better off flying 2 aircraft just an hour apart to capture the connectivity better. But in addition to what you mentioned about the what's it called? The Fly Dubai's increase to Addis, they're also increasing services quietly to Entebbe. And I think that's another interesting thing. And I think just as we look in terms of this trend, I think Fly Dubai is flying under the radar a bit over here. They're doing a lot of these quiet expansions in markets with Emirates codes on them, one should add. These are all code shared with Emirates, so they're EK operated by Fly Dubai. And it's just a quiet increase of feed to the Dubai mega hub. And I've said this before multiple times. Fly Dubai is effectively the regional arm of Emirates now, from a planning standpoint at least. They work together in terms of where capacity is best allocated. And I think having these multiple frequencies in key East African markets where Emirates can't necessarily put in multiple wide bodies a day due to aircraft, due to just simply the demand in some of these markets, but still not wanting to surrender some of this demand to airlines that can, like maybe Qatar, who can put A320s and so forth into these markets, or Etihad. It's an interesting dynamic to see how that has evolved, and especially to see how Fly Dubai is doing it, because in contrast to a fellow UAE airline who announces 10 new routes before they even are announced, or a Saudi airline which announces that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread before they even have a plane, Fly Dubai is just adding planes and making money quietly under the radar.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
also,
nice.
Also, the reason why Fly Dubai makes money is because they have a large point-to-point home market base, and they're using the right type of aircraft on majority of their routes. Let's put it that way. Either they do it by having once a day or twice a day flights, and there's no issue with the baggage also on the 737 MAX 8s. But the main thing for Fly Dubai in their advantage is their home market base.
Yeah, and they've done great with it. And we've had John's hosted the Fly Dubai guys on the podcast before, and I think they were very candid in terms of what they shared as what is driving their growth and expansion. And I think Martin from Kenya Airways also was, in terms of how difficult it is to compete with them sometimes because of the strength of both the home market as well as the entire Dubai mega hub, which makes it difficult for African carriers feeding into Dubai to compete while those guys have that hub advantage. Yeah, it's great to see this kind of market dynamics taking hold, where these markets may the best player win due to their strategy, due to their choices and everything else, rather than you win because you happen to be the president's brother.
Yes, and also...
And a good place to wrap up. I'm sorry, Behramjee, I'm going to have to wrap up now.
Just one last thing. Entebbe was increased by Fly Dubai. People will be surprised to know that Entebbe, Dubai is the second largest point-to-point market in sub-Saharan Africa. 227,000 passengers flew it last year. And that will only grow further with Fly Dubai increasing, because the labor market demand on that route is, as well as traders, a lot of Ugandan traders go to Dubai. That will be further stimulated. So I would not be surprised in 2025 or even by end of 2024 if this market has gone up to 240 to 50,000 passengers.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to say a massive thank you to Joao for giving us his time and his experience. So thank you so much, Joao.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here with Sean and Behramjee.
Thank you. I just thought we'd put some sound effects in there at the end. And thank you. Yeah, thanks to everybody for listening. If you did enjoy the conversation, of course, as always, hit the share button, share it with somebody in your network that you think would be interested in hearing. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And we'll be back very soon for the next one. So thank you all for joining us, and take care and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.